Radish's patient is not making any progress. He could not determine what the reason is for the fever and the other symptoms after all the typical analysis. He is kind of convinced the pink spider is the reason, but he is not the expert, never faced this before. There are multiple existing papers explaining the symptoms, but they are not concluding, too generic. John is a biologist. He is investigating a set of plants suspected to provide a cure for a strange virus, living in the western coast of Michigan, and discovered valuable information written in several regional languages and also natives who have been using it for several generations. Alice, John, Peter, Mariana, Gunter and Jorge face the same issue pattern. They have a need, and they will have to research, gather information, facts, past experiences and come to a conclusion based on a multiplicity of sources written probably in different languages, from people with different knowledge on the topic.
But how is the software industry helping here? Maybe to store or search for content, but all in all there is no specific technology. Today, it is challenging for the software industry to discover game-changing use cases, so as to persuade customers to make big investments, because there is a good coverage for traditional line of business and vertical industry processes execution. But the knowledge management related areas, dominated by natural language, lay outside the reach of relational databases or typical programming languages, all in all, leaving the comfort area of blacks and whites, that get along so well with the binary IT world. NOP provides the foundations to support research and development areas for many industries, where grays are more common than blacks and whites. There is so much written in natural language, just take a minute to imagine the power of a system, capable of understanding country regulations, medical information, nature, or any area of human knowledge, breaking the natural language understanding barrier.
Unlike the traditional line of business processes, like finance, logistics or even analytical data handling, where the data schema is fixed, there exist these many other areas, where it is not possible to foresee the data model in advance. For this type of use cases, the de facto format to save and share information is writing paragraphs of text. Here, no automation takes place. To analyze the information, it is required for a person to read and understand the idea. NOP is more focused on handling unstructured information. Of course, you can store vendor invoice information, production orders, or even tax calculation rules, but most probably, a traditional database and programming language could execute more efficiently based on predefined processes and attributes. Instead of that, consider now saving or searching for research information about flu. The difference is now enormous. There will be references to other types of diseases, references to past experiences or facts, also comparisons, many details subject to conditions, description of capabilities and even its effects. It is clear that the type of technology to manage this information is fundamentally different. NOP is designed for this purpose. It is related to natural human languages, by taking the constructs and components of the language's semantics, supporting cross-references, comparisons, and many other functionalities. Furthermore, there is another difference that makes NOP unique, and it is its capability to focus on objectives compliance, and the attributes and capabilities that make entities who they really are. This concept is pretty revolutionary, but also is the key to handle this type of information. Objective compliance focus allows to make analysis of data to get more understanding about a particular topic, but based on the minimum knowledge required, disregarding collateral details. Along those lines, the entity's attribute centricity also help by capturing the attributes that define the basis for an entity type, existing or not. Consider for example a car which has lost a wheel. Is it still a car? Or what needs to be lost in order to become another type of entity? Entities in our natural world are not black and white, and NOP explores blur areas outside the reach of traditional information technology.
Even when NOP can be considered an artificial intelligence artifact, in fact, it is based on traditional technology, That is, each concrete fact stored is saved using a precise syntax to maximize information consistency. This specific syntax is the natural data model. You can imagine the natural data model like programming classes in object-oriented language, where entities, attributes, instances and methods exist, but now expanded to accommodate all components existing in nature, ranging from the physical to the imaginary or abstract, and from the volitional to the inanimate entities. They all have a room in NOP, but the limits are very strict. Imagine, for example, a fact violating basic principles of physics or chemistry. It is simply not possible, but NOP still can deal with that. On the other hand, artificial intelligence visual recognition tools could represent a perfect match, providing sources of information to generate data records. Given the nature of the model, it is possible not only to access complete ideas and relationships, but also analyze them in pieces to determine, or also compare similar ideas or entities as described by different sources. In nature, there is no single truth, and furthermore it mutates. Consider for a moment the medical protocols on how to treat certain diseases, and how them evolved moved by experience and research over the years. From this perspective, NOP can be self-evolutionary, by analyzing the database and generating both new ideas or theories as well as automatic source reliability valuations. Another key aspect of NOP is its capability to find the right room for every piece of information, that is, understanding the context, rather than the possible words that define the information, to extract the possible meaning and hidden facts or objectives. All in all, natural languages are affected by regionalisms, context and much worse, what is known as the economy mechanisms, that remove crucial components of the communication, assuming common understanding and reducing redundancy. All this complex explanation will be easily simplified analyzing an example. All activities have an objective in nature. Whenever something is done, it pursues an objective, motivation or need. It is always required to understand the purpose of the research activity to narrow down the relevant information. Since most of the information is saved in neutral format, there is basically no translation from language to language, but a rendering process going from the idea to the particular language. Of course, each idea contains references to neutral meanings, and also the keywords used in the input language. Going in the opposite direction from a natural language to an idea is not part of the current scope, but NOP represents a valuable tool for that purpose as well. Natural language parsing is typically based on rules and statistics, but since there is no understanding or background, the precision is low. With NOP, natural language parsing.
Now a simplified example to instruct the approach. Dogs can be brown and white. This is easy to understand. Everybody receiving this piece of information already knows what the dog is, an animal. So only key information is given. This idea can be represented with the combination of techniques. First, we can say that the dog is part or similar to a broader set of different parts entities. Another technique is describing the components like attributes, their valuations, circumstances, components, and capabilities. Let's think about this example a bit more, not now oriented for a toddler but a bit more realistic. When we say dogs can be brown and white, actually we mean that the dog fur could be color brown and white. That is, the attribute named color was not explained, the reason being, both black and white are simple representations of color. Along the same lines, we know that some circumstances might apply, like for example, occurrence frequencies, along with reasons or conditions. Furthermore, like many other entities of this group, dogs have or may inherit also components, like legs, compared to other animals, and have capabilities as well, like barking. It was a good explanation about dogs, but going more into the details, we could actually say that the dog fur, which is also a valid component, has the attribute color brown and white, or again its fur hair color brown and white. Basically, the conclusion is that the more we want to refine the idea, the more we can, and this is how it works in nature. The question is then, when to stop asking for more details. And now is when NOP principles have to be considered. The moment the objective of the idea is sufficiently explained for the predefined audience, then, there's no need for further details. Switching to more detailed descriptions also implies switching the context and realm. That is, the explanation expected from an elementary school child will be different from the one expected from a veterinarian. This is the concept of realm, and that shows how multiple representations of the same idea make sense for diverse contexts and objectives.
So as to better understand what it is all about, let's think about this quote. He knows that there are in the soul tints more bewildering, more numberless and more nameless, than the colors of an autumn forest. Many people, including for instance visionary writers like Chesterton or Burgess, analyzed the relationship between nature and natural languages in the past. Natural languages on one hand, have the capability to define what happens in nature, but on the other hand, they need to be simple enough to be used efficiently. All natural languages share a subset of components, like entities, attributes, capabilities and many more, but the existing list of words in this particular subset is restricted to a practical limit that can be remembered. Then the rest of the components or meanings are expressed using combinations. From language to language, the list of words and combinations are different, and of course the same applies to the written representation, or sounds, associated with them. How many words are needed to name all the colors of a forest in fall? The answer is both infinite, and also nameless. Two concepts outside the IT comfort area. In NOP, instead of saving the information using a regular text format, the idea is composed by connecting four major components. The context is one of the components providing information about the situation and topic involved. The entities describe all the actors and including their components, which are typically a long list, and subject to validations derived mainly from the execution of actions, along with circumstantial information. Ontologies deal with the description of the entities and their relationships. Processes arise from the execution of capabilities like eating, thinking, etc. Also, events occurred from the simple elapsing of time or natural events are contained in this list. Finally, the idea ties these different components, but also the components can be analyzed in isolation.
Going more into details about the entities, in NOP they are handled in a very particular way, since entities are recognized more as a shortcut than a main component. This type of approach is challenging, but provides the flexibility required for the purpose. There are four categories of entities, always without considering their instances, that are handled as a different group. Entities are split both by physical or abstract nature, from one perspective, and also from volitional or inanimate nature, from another perspective. So for example, capabilities to execute actions, only applies to some of the groups. Another example are the restrictions that apply to real physical entities, like birds' capability to flight on its own, but not possible to human beings, unless considered in some sort of specific environment or imaginary literature. So, an entity type or instance is the result of a process of classification, based on either the inclusion into a group, comparisons, or directly describing all the available component. Incidentally, comparison and inclusion are the best way to massively classify an entity and describe only distinguishing features that makes it unique.
Think now about an elephant. The first thing that probably comes to your mind is its size, weight, or memory, compared to other animals. And not so much the fact that they have 4 legs, since there are many mammals with 4 legs. Entity's description is confined to remarkable facts only.
The context itself deserves a close-up, due to the major role in NOP. Today, access to information has been simplified. In most situations, large amount is accessible via internet. NOP brings the benefit of contextualizing it. Suppose a researcher is searching for information on the usage of a plant for medical purposes. Going to internet is of course a massive source of information, but he or she will instinctively perform a list of steps. Validating the certainty and accuracy, reading the information with pre-existing records, and trying to generate the environment, just like building a stable wall with small bricks, without leaving holes in it. Additional iterations with the data source, or research from existing records, will increase certainty and accuracy. Understanding how the different entities involved will comply with their objectives, is the key to understand each action, that step-by-step move to the final objective. For non-volitional entities, things happens. For volitional on the other hand, actions are only executed if those actions help reach a need, could be a physiological, belonging, self-actualization or whatever, but the need is always there. Every information source, assuming the research is not based on field investigation, but pre-existing content, needs to be constantly challenged. The original writer might have had limited knowledge on the topic, maybe was aiming another audience. Today the information might be outdated, or biased by commercial purposes, but all in all, is it still good to comply with the objective? This is something we constantly do, and you are doing now. Time automatically changes relationship status, objects characteristics valuation, source reliability and thus the certainty and accuracy. Supporting the notion of sequences and processes is very important. Actually it is the basis for prerequisites, cause and effects understanding. It also implies internal reevaluations of information. And finally the relationships that tie we all together. Relationships comply with rather fixed rules. First we have the entities groups. Imagine each entity group as a two-dimensional matrix. On one axis we have the three classification types. And on the other, we have a finite list of circumstances that apply to some of those cells. Each cell in this three-dimensional matrix defines in a concrete way, whether the relationship is required, possible, or not possible. It means that in nature, the domain of circumstances that might apply to an entity group and classification method combination is very concrete. This is also a key capability in NOP, that drastically draws the line between possible and impossible. This is also a key difference with natural language, and might be in the future a good way to evolve natural language processing. And then for those situations where it is somehow valid, it also specifies how it should be interpreted, when the relationship is not explicitly described in the idea. Let's see the example.
Going back to the brown and white dogs example, it is clear that the bare words, brown and white, are not likely to be valid valuations for an entity. But instead, most probably, a list of valuations for a visual attribute, here called color, which in turn, is one attribute that applies to physical entities, like dogs. NOP tooling provides guidance to avoid misleading statements derived from natural language's simplifications.
Let's see how NOP could be used. First of all, today there is so much content written natural languages, that a first possibility is to capture already existing information and store this content in NOP using neutral way. But not just that, for research areas, it is a definitive good way to store content, improving the precision offered by natural languages. On the consuming side, the content in NOP can be easily rendered and adjusted for the target audience, starting from scientific all the way to scholar, etc. Furthermore, and maybe one of the more visionary capabilities, is to develop self-analysis processes, to generate further information, or helping with decision path by providing statistical content. Finally, the knowledge packages represented as lessons, are a new way to exchange information, just like books today. But unlike books, content could be automatically imported into an NOP instance, as lessons to enrich the database, and reanalyze it. In NOP, there are two internal areas. One area, in charge of dealing with the information received, known as lessons, and the other, automatically generated, based on these lessons. That is, each NOP instance generates its own internal knowledge area, affected by the lessons received. Understanding how to model nature with all its complexities is a milestone after the creation of natural languages. Today NOP provides the foundations for the next generation information technology industry.